I never believed in curses until I inherited the Blackwood Mill. The package arrived on a Tuesday, 6 days after my sister's funeral. Inside the weathered cardboard box was a tarnished brass key, a deed to a property I'd never heard of, and a letter written in my sister Emma's careful handwriting. The edges of the paper had yellowed, suggesting she'd written it some time ago. It read, "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry. The Blackwood Mill is yours now, Daniel. I never told you about our family's connection to it because I wanted to protect you. Some inheritances are burdens. Some legacies are stained. I tried to break the cycle, but I failed. Maybe you'll succeed where I couldn't. Whatever you do, don't let the twins out of the attic." I read the letter 3 times, reaching for some further explanation, but found none. Emma had always been cryptic, prone to bouts of melancholy that our parents attributed to an artistic temperament. Her suicide hadn't surprised me as much as it should have. What surprised me was this inheritance, a mill I'd never heard of, in a town I didn't know, with a warning about twins I couldn't possibly understand. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of a dirt road, staring up at what must have been the Blackwood Mill. The building rose like a wound in the landscape, a 3-story structure of weathered redwood that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the late afternoon light. Behind it, ancient pines crowded close, whispering secrets to one another as the wind combed through their needles. The town of Pinefall was 20 miles behind me, a collection of faded buildings and wary faces. When I'd mentioned the Blackwood property, conversation had withered and died like cut flowers in the sun. The clerk at the only motel had hesitated before handing me the room key, her eyes darting to the window as if checking that night hadn't fallen early. "That place has been empty for nearly 15 years, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper though we were alone in the office. "Not since that woman bought it, the one who never came to town except for supplies, kept to herself, had those girls with her." "Girls?" I asked, thinking of Emma's warning. "Twins, I heard. Never saw them myself, just heard tell." Now, as I approached the mill, the conversation echoed in my head. The building loomed larger with each step, its windows like vacant eyes watching me approach. A rusted fence surrounded the property, listing drunkenly in places where the soil had eroded. The gate creaked in protest as I pushed it open, the sound amplified in the unnatural stillness. Something was wrong with the air here. It felt heavy, resistant, as if it didn't want to enter my lungs. Each breath required conscious effort. The smell was wrong, too, not the clean scent of pine I'd detected on the drive in, but something underneath it, something old and sour, like meat left too long in summer heat. The brass key turned reluctantly in the lock. The door opened into darkness, disturbing dust motes that danced in the shaft of late afternoon light. I fumbled for a light switch, but found none, and I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight. The entrance hall was cavernous, with a grand staircase ascending to a second-floor landing. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, settling into my presence as if evaluating me. To my right, a parlor with sheet-covered furniture. To my left, what appeared to be a dining room, a massive oak table dominating the space. Directly ahead, beyond the stairs, a corridor led deeper into the house. I moved carefully, playing my light across the surfaces thick with dust. The air grew denser as I ventured further in, pressing against my ears until it popped. The silence wasn't complete. There were small sounds, a building's skeleton shifting, the whisper of my own footsteps, and something else, a faint, rhythmic creaking, coming from somewhere above. On the second floor, I found what must have been Emma's room. Unlike the rest of the house, it showed signs of recent habitation. Bed sheets rumpled, a book open on the nightstand, a half-empty glass of water. It was as if she'd just stepped out momentarily. The glass of water troubled me the most. How long had it been there? Emma had been dead for nearly a month. A framed photograph on the dresser caught my attention. 2 identical little girls, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with pale blonde hair and solemn eyes. They were dressed in matching blue dresses, holding hands. There was something unsettling about their posture, though, too rigid, their smiles too perfect, as if they'd been carefully posed by unseen hands. I turned the frame over, hoping for some notation, a date, a name. There was nothing. The creaking sound was louder now. It was coming from above me, from the 3rd floor, from the attic. "Don't let the twins out of the attic," Emma had written. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Night was falling. Through a window, I watched as the last light drained from the sky, leaving behind a darkness so profound it seemed to have substance. I should have gone back to the motel in town. I should have waited until the morning to explore further, but some compulsion drew me toward the narrow door at the end of the hall, the one that surely led to the attic stairs. The door wasn't locked. It opened into a steep, narrow staircase. My phone's light barely penetrated the darkness beyond the first few steps. I ascended slowly, each wooden tread protesting beneath my weight. The creaking I'd heard earlier had stopped, replaced by silence so complete it rang in my ears. At the top of the stairs was another door, this one secured with a heavy iron bolt that slid across brackets mounted in the wood. The bolt was engaged. Whatever was in the attic was locked in, not out. I stood there, frozen in indecision. Emma's warning pulsed in my mind, "Don't let the twins out of the attic." But curiosity is a potent force, particularly when mixed with grief and confusion. I needed to understand why my sister had died, why she'd left me this strange property, why she'd written that cryptic warning. I slid the bolt back. The attic door swung open before I could touch it, as if pushed from within. A cold draft washed over me, carrying a sweet, cloying scent that reminded me of overripe fruit. My phone's light revealed a vast, open space with rough-hewn beams overhead and bare wooden floors underneath. The ceiling sloped sharply on either side, following the roofline. The room was empty, except for 2 small beds pushed against the far wall. The beds were made with white linens, hospital tight. They looked recently used, no dust, no signs of abandonment. Between them was a small table with a kerosene lamp and a book. My feet carried me forward without conscious decision, drawn to that book like a moth to a flame. It was a journal, leather-bound and worn. When I opened it, I recognized Emma's handwriting immediately. The first entry was dated 3 years ago. I found them. After all this time searching, I've finally found our family's secret. The twins are real. The stories were true. I've brought them here, to the place where it all began. I think I can help them. I have to try. I flipped through pages, scanning entries. The girls are responding to treatment. They sleep more peacefully now. Sometimes when they're sleeping, I can almost convince myself they're normal children. At another place in the pages, it read, "Incident today. Sarah attacked me during our session. The scratches are deep. I've locked them in for the night." My eyes caught another entry reading, "They speak in unison now, all the time. It would be fascinating if it wasn't so terrifying." Flipping through more, I read, "I found old records in the basement. This goes back further than I thought, all the way to 1860. Always twins, always girls, always in this place." Still another entry read, "They know things they shouldn't know about our parents, about Daniel, about what happened that summer." My name on the page sent a jolt through me. What did Emma mean? What did these mysterious twins know about me? The last entry was dated 1 month ago, just days before Emma's death. "I've failed. What lives inside the twins is too strong, too old. It wants out. It wants to continue what it started all those years ago. I can feel its influence growing. It whispers to me at night, shows me things, terrible things. There's only one way to end this, but I'm not strong enough to do what needs to be done. I've sent Daniel. Maybe he can finish what I couldn't." A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs. The attic was no longer empty. 2 girls stood by the door, the same girls from the photograph downstairs, though they looked no older. Their pale blonde hair hung limply around faces that were too thin, too angular to be childlike. They wore identical blue dresses, faded and worn. They held hands as they smiled at me. "Hello, Uncle," they said in perfect unison, their voices overlapping in a way that made my skin crawl. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. The light wavered, casting grotesque shadows along their faces. For an instant, just an instant, their faces seemed to shift, to become something older, something hungry. "Where are you?" I managed to ask. "Where are Sarah and—" I realized I didn't know the other twin's name. Emma's journal had only mentioned Sarah. Their smiles widened, revealing teeth that seemed inhumanly sharp and far too numerous. "Sarah is gone," they said. "Lily is gone. They've been gone a very long time." "Then who are you?" My voice was barely a whisper. They tilted their heads in perfect synchronization, like birds contemplating a swarm. "We are what waits in dark places. We are what feeds on guilt and grief. We are what your family invited in all those years ago." My back hit the wall. There was nowhere else to retreat. "What do you want?" "To finish what we started," they said, taking a step forward, "with your sister, with your parents, with all the Blackwoods, back to the beginning." "My parents died in an accident," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, doubt crept in. Had it been an accident? I'd been away at college. Emma had called me with the news. I'd never questioned it. "Is that what Emma told you?" they giggled. A sound like breaking glass. "Ask her yourself." They stepped aside, revealing a third figure that had been standing behind them. A woman, head bowed, long dark hair obscuring her face. Slowly she looked up. Emma! Her eyes were vacant, her skin gray. A deep gash ran across her throat, no longer bleeding, but not healed, a permanent wound. I must have screamed. I must have run. My next clear memory is of being in my car, driving recklessly down the dark mountain road, my headlights slicing through fog that hadn't been there during my ascent. My hands shook violently on the steering wheel. I couldn't get enough air. I spent that night in the motel, curled into a ball on a mattress that smelled of cigarettes and industrial cleaner, the lights blazing and the TV blaring to keep the silence at bay. I told myself I'd imagined it all, a hallucination born of grief and exhaustion. Emma had committed suicide. My parents had died in a car crash. There were no twins locked in an attic. There was no family curse. But in the harsh light of morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. I had to understand. The mill looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less imposing. The sense of wrongness remained, but it was muted like a scream heard from a great distance. I entered cautiously, half expecting to find the twins waiting for me, but the house was empty and silent. I went straight to the basement. If Emma had found records there, perhaps they would explain what was happening. The stairs leading down were concealed behind a door in the kitchen, narrower and steeper than those to the attic. The air grew noticeably cooler as I descended. The basement was cavernous, extending beyond the footprint of the house itself, excavated deep into the hillside. Support beams of ancient redwood held up the ceiling, each one as thick as my body. Against the far wall was a rusted metal cabinet. Inside, I found what I was looking for, a stack of leather-bound journals, similar to Emma's, but much older. The earliest was dated 1860. I spent hours in the basement, reading by the beam of my phone's flashlight as it slowly died. The story that emerged from those pages was fragmented, told across generations, but the pattern was clear. In 1860, Charles Copperton, the original owner of the mill, had twin daughters who became possessed by something ancient and malevolent. A reverend had been called to perform an exorcism, but he was no man of God. He was a charlatan who preyed on the vulnerable, who stoked hatred of the native people who manipulated Copperton and his brothers into acts of violence. Under the reverend's influence, Copperton had committed unspeakable acts with his own daughters. In his shame and horror, he had set fire to the mill, hoping to destroy himself and his daughters to end the cycle. But they had survived. The twins had survived, though something else lived inside them now. They'd been hidden away, spoken of only in whispers, passed from one generation of caretakers to the next. Always women, and always Blackwoods, my family, my blood. The final journal entry was in Emma's handwriting, though it wasn't in the journal I'd found in the attic. This was something else, a confession, a warning. I thought I could cure them. I was wrong. The evil that inhabits them is patient. It waits. It watches. It's been feeding on our family for generations, growing stronger with each sacrifice. Our parents weren't supposed to die. That was my fault. I'd stopped giving the twins what they needed. Guilt, grief, blood. They reached out and took it themselves. I've tried to end it. Fire doesn't work. Cooperton already tried that. The entities inhabiting the twins can move from host to host if threatened. They've done it before. If the current vessels are destroyed, they'll find new ones. There's only one solution. The original ritual must be completed, the one Cooperton began but never finished. It requires a willing sacrifice, someone of the same bloodline, someone who understands what's at stake. I thought I could do it. I came here intending to end this, but I'm not strong enough. I've already let them into my mind. I can feel them inside me now, whispering, showing me things I don't want to see. If you're reading this, Daniel, I'm sorry. It has to be you now. The knife is in the top drawer of the bedside table in my room. The ritual is simple. Your blood, freely given under the full moon, directly over the spot where it all began, the center of the attic where the mill wheel's axe once ran. Do this and it ends, all of it. No more Blackwoods will suffer. No more innocent people will die to feed what lives in those girls. I'm sorry, little brother. I never wanted it to be you. I closed the journal, my hands numb. Outside, the darkness had fallen again. Through the small basement window, I could see the full moon rising, casting silvery light across the overgrown yard. I climbed the stairs slowly, my mind racing. Was I really considering this? Human sacrifice? Ritual magic? It was insanity. And yet, what I'd seen in the attic hadn't been natural. The twins, or whatever wore their forms, were something ancient and malevolent. I believed that now. In Emma's room, I found the knife just where she said it would be. The blade was old, the handle wrapped in leather, darkened by years of handling. It felt warm to the touch, as if recently used. The walk to the attic seemed longer this time, each step heavier than the last. The door at the top of the stairs stood open, moonlight spilling through a small round window and pooling on the wooden floor. The room was empty again. No twins, no apparition of my sister, just two neatly made beds and the journal on the table between them. In the center of the floor was a dark stain about 3 feet in diameter. I hadn't noticed it the night before, too distracted by the journal, by the appearance of the twins. Now, in the moonlight, it was unmistakable. Blood, old blood, soaked deep into the wood. I knelt beside it, knife in hand. This was madness. I should leave, burn the journals, sell the property, forget what I'd seen. And yet, if Emma was right, the evil that lived here wouldn't be contained. It would find new hosts, continue its cycle of feeding on our family's guilt and grief. How many more would die? You came back. The twins stood in the doorway, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like a cat's. They weren't smiling now. I had to, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. They stepped into the room, moving in that unsettling unison. She told you what to do, what she couldn't do herself. Yes. It won't work, they said, drawing closer. Others have tried. The Reverend, the mill owner, your great-grandmother, your sister. All failed. Why would it work for me? They stopped at the edge of the bloodstain, looking down at the knife in my hand. It wouldn't. That's why we're going to help you. Before I could react, they lunged forward, each grabbing one of my arms. Their strength was impossible, like iron bands clamping down around my biceps. They forced my hand up, one holding the knife. I struggled, but it was like fighting the tide. "Your sister lied," they whispered. Their mouths were so close to my ears that I felt their breath. "The sacrifice isn't you. It never was." With a sudden, violent motion, they drove my hand downward, plunging the knife into my thigh. Pain exploded through me, bright and urgent, blood welling up, soaking my jeans and spilling onto the stained floor beneath. "Blood calls to blood," they said, releasing my arms and stepping back. "Vessel calls to vessel." The blood seeping from my wound didn't pool as it should have. Instead, it was drawn to the darker stain on the floor, flowing against gravity, against nature. Where they met, the wood began to smoke, to bubble, as if the blood were acid eating through it. A crack formed into the floorboards, widening as I watched, revealing darkness beneath. Not the second floor of the house, but something else. A void, a negative space. And from that void came whispers, countless voices speaking at once in a language I couldn't understand but somehow recognized. The language of nightmares. The twins stood at the edge of the widening crack, their faces ecstatic. "It's time," they said. "Time to go home. Time to bring the others." I knew then what they meant. The evil that had possessed the original Copperton twins hadn't been alone. It had been a scout, a harbinger, and now, with my blood, Blackwood blood, Copperton blood, it was opening a door. Clutching my wounded leg, I staggered to my feet. The pain was excruciating, but clarity had come with it. Emma hadn't been trying to end the curse. She had been trying to complete it, to open the door, and she'd manipulated me into finishing what she couldn't. The crack in the floor was widening, the void beneath, pulsing like a heartbeat. The twins began to change, their forms elongating, their features melting and reshaping into something inhuman. Their skin split across invisible seams, revealing darkness underneath. I lurched toward the door, each step sending fresh agony through my wounded leg. Behind me, the twins, no longer recognizable as human, let out a sound that was part laughter and part scream. The void was nearly wide enough now for something to emerge. In the doorway, I hesitated. I could run, I could escape, but what would come through that door would follow. It would hunt. It would feed, and it would be my fault. My gaze fell on the kerosene lamp between the twins' beds. With one desperate lunge, I grabbed it, smashing it against the floor. Kerosene spilt out, igniting on contact with the still smoking wood. Flames leapt up, hungry and bright. The twins shrieked, a sound beyond human capacity for pain or rage. They moved toward me, their forms now barely recognizable, twisted, elongated parodies of human shape. I threw myself backward, tumbling down the attic stairs, my wounded legs screaming in protest. The fire spread faster than should have been possible, racing across the floor, up the walls, consuming everything in its path. The twins' shrieks turned into howls as the flames reached them. They tried to retreat, to escape back through the crack in the floor, but the fire followed them, pouring into the void like liquid light. I dragged myself down the hallway, down the grand staircase, across the entrance hall. Behind me, the mill was becoming an inferno, the ancient wood crackling and popping as it surrendered to the flames. The heat was intense, the smoke thick and choking. Outside, I collapsed on the overgrown lawn, watching as fire consumed the Blackwood Mill. The upper story was fully engulfed now, flames licking out of every window. The roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending the sparks spiraling into the night sky. From deep within the burning structure came one final sound. Not the twins' voices, but something older, something furious. A promise, not a threat. "We will return." I knew it was true. Fire hadn't worked for Cooperton. It wouldn't work for me. Whatever had possessed those twins, whatever had lived in that mill, wasn't gone. It was dormant now, waiting. It would find new vessels, new caretakers. Perhaps not in my lifetime, but someday. As the town's emergency services arrived, as the paramedics attended to my wounded leg, as police asked questions I couldn't possibly answer truthfully, I made a decision. I would do what Emma couldn't, what generations of my family had failed to do. I would find a way to end this permanently. The curse of Blackwood Mill wasn't over, but neither was I. In my pocket, I still had the key, the tarnished brass key that had opened this door in the first place. It felt warm against my palm, almost alive, and for just a moment, as the painkillers took hold and consciousness began to slip away, I thought I heard a whisper. "We're still here, Uncle. We're waiting. We'll always be waiting." Thanks for listening to my Dark Veil tale. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me grow this channel so I can make more content for your enjoyment. Also, check out the linked video for another creeper-style story from Dark Veil Tales.